I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. My name is Terry Moore, and I'm going to take off my glasses because I can see they have a glare. My name is Terry Moore, and I am the Executive Director for the Decatur Prevention Initiative, but I'm also on the leadership team and one of the founding members for the Decatur Parent Network. And some of you are members already. If you aren't a member yet, know that there are two ways that you can join in and get our communications regularly. And that is to join us as a member by signing the pledge. And the pledge is not a legally binding document. It is just an intent, and just so that we all know where each other stand. But you may also share that you may also join as a friend. Sometimes we have folks who don't live in Decatur, but still want to get our information, or they don't have any children, or they just don't feel comfortable signing that pledge. So please feel free to join us. Our network started in 2016, and we have now grown to over 700 friends and family. So we're very excited about that. And we would like to let you know that as a result, over these years, DPI has been tracking, and as we are tracking, hi Miss D, I see her face come up there. She's
hello.
You may want to stop your audio and video, Miss D. Miss D, if Miss D would wave first before she goes, though, because Miss D is our parent outreach coordinator with the Decatur Prevention Initiative, and she has been with us for over 20 years. But as we are looking at what we've been doing in Decatur, we are actually seeing that with the efforts that we have made with parents, kids are beginning to perceive that their parents don't approve of alcohol and drug use. And as those parent disapproval rates go up, we're seeing our drug rates go down. So they're still not as low as we'd like them to be. They're still higher than most in the state, but we are seeing a definite move in the right direction. We want to thank all of you guys for that. Please know that we have a lot of events coming up, and Marnie is going to share those, who's behind the scenes with us at the end of the session tonight. And before we go on any further, what we would love to have folks do is we would love to have a poll. We would love to take just a quick poll to see who we have with us tonight. And so Marnie is going to launch that. Thank you, Marnie. So if we have just 3 quick questions. I know it's kind of hard if you happen to be on a cell phone calling in. It's a little bit harder to vote on the polls, and we hate that. We'd love to get everybody's input. But the first question is, we really just wanted to know what grade levels we are in tonight. I think that will help our presenter in knowing who she's addressing.
Just have a couple more and then I'll show it.
I'm actually, I guess that's because I am following the leader here. I actually see them on my screen, which is wonderful. I see that many people have shared this. So it looks like we have a nice mix everywhere from pre-K to my kids are gone to I don't have children. The predominant area is middle school, and then we're looking at 9th to 12th graders. So this is very helpful to know. Marnie, can we move us down to our second question?
You should be able to see it.
Thank you. this was another one that we really were curious about, and that we wanted to know if your child has been at any point and a target of bullying, cyberbullying, or online harassment. And knowing that this is anonymous. And some, a little, a lot, not that you know about. Yeah. And then down to our next question, Marnie, can you share those results? Can everyone see those results as well? Maybe your child would tell you, maybe they wouldn't. Okay. And just don't know. And then the last one is, do you feel like you've been a target of bullying or cyberbullying? And a quarter of the people on here tonight feel like that they have experienced that during their adult life. So thank you very much for sharing that information. I know that when we were organizing this, this was in response to a community request that we look at online safety and cyberbullying and bullying. And we've been trying to get around to that this year. We've done this several times in the past. But one of the things as I was researching it that really hit me was how many adults have been victimized by online harassment. And guys, there are some wonderful resources that you're going to hear tonight and some places to go that I personally wish I had known about when my two adult children have both experienced online harassment, and I just wish I had known that. So I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you for your time. Tonight, our moderator is going to be Dr. Kimberly Jones. And I've known Dr. Jones for a long time, probably since she came into the system. She came into the City Schools of Decatur in 2007, but she's been in education for 21 years. She is the head counselor at the Decatur High School, but also she is the district lead counselor. And so she supports and mentors and trains other counselors, as well as stays actively involved with our kids. She's also the mother of 3 children. She is also DPI's longest standing coalition member and one of our greatest supporters. And so it just seems like whenever we ask her to do something, she's right there for us. So we can't say enough about what a great partner and friend she has been. And Dr. Jones will take it from here.
All right, thank you. Gracious introduction. And so as not to prolong the time, I am going to give a brief introduction of our speaker for tonight so that she can go ahead and get started giving you this amazing information. So Erin Beacham serves as the Deputy Regional Director in the Southeast region of the Anti-Defamation League. Prior to this role, Erin was the Education Director in the region for 5 years. ADL Southeast region encompasses Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and Tennessee. The office was first established in Atlanta in 1946 and has served those communities in the South ever since. In this position, Erin develops, manages, and implements ADL's programs. These programs include A World of Difference Institute, the premier anti-bias trainings for students, counselors, teachers, No Place for Hate, the year-long bullying prevention campaign that quite a few of the schools in the city, schools of Decatur, are a part of, workplace inclusivity trainings, as well as Holocaust education. Erin also focuses on coalition building and partnerships throughout the region. Erin was born and raised in Atlanta, although she spent 15 years in Greensboro, North Carolina. We won't hold that against her. She has dual bachelor's degrees in psychology and African American studies from Guilford College and a master in peace and conflict studies from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro. During her time at UNCG, Her final semester was spent in the Student Affairs Office, where she researched the withdrawal policy, specifically in regard to students affected by trauma at UNG and various other institutions across the country. Erin is excited to bring her passion of social justice and equity work back to her hometown of Atlanta and surrounding communities. And we are very excited that she did just that and come back home to share this with us. So with no further ado, Erin Beacham.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Jones. I appreciate that. I knew when I was in North Carolina that the rest of my family was not coming up there. So it was time for me to come home back to Atlanta. And I am so grateful to be back in Atlanta. I've been here for back here for almost 7 or 8 years now. So it's always been home and always will be. Thanks everybody for being here tonight. Thank you, Terry and Marnie, of course, Dr. Jones for inviting me. As we started looking back on this, I think this presentation, I did a similar presentation at least over 3 years ago. And even to just give a little perspective, I now have my own 2 children within those 3 years. So I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old. And so I think that even now being a parent myself, this presentation means just even something different now. And so I'm really just excited to be a part of this tonight. So thank you for showing up. I know that we are all kind of zoomed out, but I really appreciate each of you being here. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. If I could actually get one of the attendees to just put in the chat that you see it, just so I know that y'all can see it on your end, if you don't mind. Perfect. Thank you, Lisa. Awesome. Y'all are on it. Thank you. All right. So as Dr. Jones says, I am the Deputy Regional Director for the Southeast region of the ADL. And so I want to kind of just give a sort of a brief overview, and then we'll kind of really dive into it. So the ADL is a century-old anti-hate organization. We were started in 1913 with the mission to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all. And we do that in 3 different ways. So you'll see that the first bucket is advocacy. So we advocate, we investigate, and we educate. So the first bucket of advocacy, really looking at criminal justice reform, immigration reform. Over the last year, obviously, we have been really diving into voting rights and hate crimes legislation. And so oftentimes with our advocacy, ADL can lead on different things, and then also sometimes we sort of uplift and support other organizations. So with the voting rights, we've always been involved in voting rights, but we know that there are a lot of other organizations that is what they primarily do. And so over the last year, we've really been working in coalition and supporting those organizations as much as we can. The hate crime legislation, over a year ago, there were 5 states in the country that did not have hate crime legislation. Georgia and South Carolina were 2 out of those 5. I should say that the Southeast region covers Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, and Tennessee. And so 2 out of 4 of our states did have hate crime legislation. I am proud to say in 2020 that we were a part of a hate-free Georgia coalition that passed hate crime legislation in Georgia. It really got a lot more attention after the murder of Ahmaud Arbery. And so almost a year ago, we were able to help pass hate crime legislation in Georgia. And right now we are working on getting hate crime legislation also passed in South Carolina. So that is some of the advocacy that we've really been focused on. And then knowing that Alabama, Tennessee, and South Carolina, their legislative sessions are still happening right now. And so really trying to, again, support and focus a lot of the advocacy happening in those 3 other states. The investigate part of what the ADL does, we have a center on extremism, and then we also have a center on technology and society. And I'll get into the CTS a little bit more in the presentation, but our COE essentially tracks domestic extremists on all sides. What are their symbols? What are their signs? What are their activities? Really looking at what they've been doing over the last couple of years, or the last year really, trying to impact voting rights. And so we've been working with law enforcement and local government and saying, what are you doing to protect the right to vote, especially in regard to extremists trying to impact it. We're the largest non-governmental organization to train FBI and local law enforcement on all of this information. So for instance, when the insurrection happened in January, we were able to help provide additional information to some of the hundreds of people that have been arrested since the insurrection. And again, like all of that sort of information that we pass along to law enforcement to help them with any sort of investigation. Another example is the Tree of Life shooting in the synagogue of up in Pittsburgh, and really being able to one, help take down a website where this the shooter was posting all sorts of anti-Semitic things, and then really looking at the 60-page we provided a 60-page document to law enforcement on who that shooter was, what were the things that were happening all around it, what are the other sort of extremist chatter that were happening after that shooting happened in the Pittsburgh synagogue. And then the educate piece is, again, what I have the privilege of doing. And so I oversee all of our programs in the Southeast region, more recently really looking at the Southern Division of the ADL, which covers 9 states in the South. And so again, No Place for Hate is our year-long bullying prevention framework. Right now we have 270 schools in the Southeast that are working towards that designation. We provide deeper dive anti-bias programs. We'll talk a little bit, you'll get kind of snippets of what those look like, talking about identity, talking about bias, talking about privilege, and then talking about ways to respond to incidents of hate and bias. Anytime that we do a program, we want to provide resources of action so that people can be allies or advocates for marginalized people. Again, as Dr. Jones said, Holocaust education, inclusivity training for workplaces. So essentially anybody who is calling, we can provide some sort of program for them. So the basic premises of our education programs, I'm not going to go through all of these, but I think that this will kind of show you even snippets of what this presentation is and kind of why and how we do things. So we believe that bias is universal. And then we also believe that prejudice can be unlearned. We all have bias. And once we become aware of it, then what are the things that we can do to sort of rewire our brain? And so we'll kind of talk about that just a little bit today, as even we're talking about bullying and bias and how some of those things go hand in hand. Time is valuable. I promised to get y'all out of here at 8 o'clock. I feel like I'm a little worried about my agenda, but I promised to get you out of here at 8 o'clock. But also understanding that even with that time, that change is a process. We know that all of us are coming from this work in different places, and how do we meet people where they are and push people a little bit outside of their comfort zones, but understanding that just because somebody spends 90 minutes with us or 2 days with us in a program, that that this is a journey, and I'm on my own personal journey of doing my own sort of DEI work. And so knowing that there's always something to be learned or even unlearned. And then diversity is a strength. And just because you have diversity doesn't mean that you have equity, and doesn't mean that you have inclusivity. And so again, what can our schools do? What can our communities do in order to celebrate that diversity, but also ensure that we're being inclusive and that we're building equitable schools and communities for everyone? So just to give a little bit of background about what we're seeing. So every year the FBI releases their hate crime statistics. These are from 2019. They have not released their 2020 hate crime statistics yet. So in 2019, there were 7,314 hate crimes reported to the FBI, which was an increase of 2.7%. So I think that once you sort of dive into that a little bit deeper, you'll see that 86% of participating police agencies reported 0 hate crimes to the FBI. So for instance, Alabama in our region reported 0 hate crimes to the FBI. So that is also one of the things that the ADL is doing, is also saying, like, we've got to report, because we have to know that that number of 7,000 is actually way higher than what is being reported to the FBI. And we've got to truly understand what is actually happening in our communities in order to make that change. So every year the ADL releases an anti-Semitic audit. And so again, actually next week, we will release the 2020 numbers. We haven't released those yet. And again, this is just anti-Semitism. That doesn't include any of the other incidents that we know are happening across the country and in our region. So this just shows you that over the last decade, we have seen a dramatic increase in anti-Semitism in the United States. So from 2009, where there were a little over 1,200 to now a little over 2,100 last year. And again, understanding that this is just what is reported to the ADL. That doesn't include all of the other anti-Semitic incidents that are not reported to us. When you look at even a little bit further into what was happening, I think this is just showing that in 2017, there were 19 assaults, and then in 2019, there were 61 assaults. And again, I think that's showing that not only are we seeing an increase in anti-Semitic incidents, but we're also seeing this increase in violence. And so what does that mean, and how do we even respond to some of those things that are happening? And this is really getting on into the sort of online piece that that Terry was talking about earlier. And so with our Center on Technology and Society, we sort of talk about this as being like ADL's Silicon Valley office. And so really working with the big corporations or the big organizations online. And so what are we seeing? Because we know that we're seeing a lot of hate and a lot of misinformation and disinformation online. And so what are those things that we can do? And so ADL recently released some information about our survey of online harassment. And so again, like really kind of looking at all of this information. So any sort of harassment, name calling, purposeful embarrassment, severe harassment, physical threats, sexual harassment, stalking, and sustained harassment. And so even understanding that 35% of people that answered this survey said that they had some sort of harassment online. And I think that's almost about what the survey said. It may be a little bit more than what y'all said individually for folks that are on this. But I think that that's just saying like what is happening online. And this includes gaming and Facebook and Instagram and anything else like that, right? So this is, and I think this is especially important. I think I saw that a lot of you are parents of middle school students, of high school students, of even some of those afterwards, really looking at what is happening in gaming. And I think that this is really something that we need to be looking at as parents, as community members. This is from 2019. 74% of people in multiplayer gaming said that they were harassed. I mean, that is mind-blowing. And so again, like really kind of taking that a step further and looking at it, called offensive names, severely harassed, discriminated against, sustained harassment, physically threatened, sexually harassed, stalked, and doxxed. And so we'll get into doxing in just a second to make sure that everybody knows what that is. But I think like this says a lot about what is happening online, and just understanding what are the games, what are the things that our students and our children are doing online, and just understanding kind of what is possibly happening, especially with the gaming industry, and really the bias that is happening with some of those games. So again, this is just getting a little bit into the discriminated against and the doxed. And so understanding the doxing actually happened a lot around the November election, and then again here in Georgia with the January Senate runoff of basically if somebody were going to dox me, they would take all of my personal information, my address, my social security number, my phone number, with the intent to harm or with the intent to threaten, and they would post all of that information online. And so we saw a lot of that with our Secretary of State and a lot of people Again, the vote in the election in January. And so we saw a lot of doxing happening with political figures, and then also again with multiplayer gaming and things like that. So just being aware of kind of some of those things that are happening. So to dive into bullying and bias just a little bit more. So what is bullying? And so we talk about it being intentional. I think that we go straight to that's bullying, right? And so really kind of understanding what is and what isn't bullying. And so we talk about it being intentional. We talk about there being that it is repetitive, that it is unprovoked, and that there's a power differential. And so even as we start talking about different incidents that are happening or things that are happening to our children, again, things that we may not think that they're going to tell us about, especially in gaming. I was talking to some other parents and I was saying, like, do you think that if your child was being bullied or being harassed while playing an online game, would they tell you? And I think a lot of people would say no, because then I think that our children would be afraid that, we would say you can't play it anymore. And so even having some of those conversations with our children, ensuring that we're trying to keep them safe. And so really kind of, again, thinking about what bullying is. And bullying can happen online. It can happen, on a physical campus. And so really, again, kind of thinking about is it intentional? Because there are times that we say things that hurt other people's feelings and there's not that intent. That does not mean that the impact isn't there. And we talk a lot about that in our programs, intent versus impact. But I think that's one thing to consider. It's repetitive, it's unprovoked. And again, I think that power differential is really, really important. I think, we've always sort of thought about that physical aspect of bullying, where it's the bigger kid picking on the littler student, and that power isn't necessarily always physical, and really thinking about that and how that really plays into bullying. So we talk about the rules of a bullying or a bias incident, and we provide this sort of language to students and to teachers all the time. So we talk about the target. Obviously, that is the person on the other side of the quote unquote joke, on the other side of the incident, the one that is, obviously the one just being targeted by whatever the incident is. We use the word aggressor rather than bully. And so a lot of statistics have shown that if we label a student or a child as a bully, they will perpetuate that label. And so rather we use the word aggressor rather than bully. We talk about bystander. We use the word bystander rather than upstander. And again, that even gets into identity and really trying to not use ableist language. And so we talk about bystander, rather than upstander and ally. And so the bystander is the person that is seeing what's happening and isn't saying anything about it. And we see this a lot, right? Like, I think that when we think about the people in an incident that are happening, most of us are bystanders rather than being able to say something or to do something. Sorry, I was getting my bystander and upstander mixed up. So ally is what we use rather than upstander. So ally is that person that is standing up for the target, that is responding, that is saying, no, that's not okay. So we also know that there's advocate and ally and all sorts of other language that we can use. But these are the 4 words that we use as we're talking about an incident. So the target, the aggressor, the bystander, and the ally. A lot of times when we do a program, especially with students, we'll ask them to write down a time that they were one of these roles. Really, sort of letting students know that these roles are fluid. And we have all been one of these roles at some point. I always joke that if you are driving in Atlanta, you have been an aggressor. So coming from somebody who learned how to drive in Atlanta. And I say that, it's sort of jokingly, but I think that shows that fluidness of how each of these roles can happen and how quickly a target can then become an aggressor. And we see that a lot where somebody has been a target over and over and over again, and they throw a punch or they fight back or whatever it is, and that's the student that gets in trouble. And so really kind of thinking about how we can be allies and how we can be allies for each other and then also for other people, and what that means. And so thinking about those sort of things as we're talking to our students and to our children. So I want to get into bias just a little bit. I don't think that we can talk about bullying and incidents of bullying and without talking about bias. I think that a lot of what we are seeing, especially when we're talking about incidents of bullying, is incidents of bias related to somebody's identity. And so I think that we know that these things are happening. And so like even how do we talk about bias? How do we connect it to bullying? And what we know that is that the majority of bullying that is happening is because of somebody's weight. Like that is the one part of a person's identity that we know is the highest reason for students being bullied. And again, that's a part of a person's identity. So thinking about identity-based bias and really kind of being able to have those conversations. And I think that we can have those conversations even with our little ones, and obviously changing the language and the way that we say those things. So again, like I think bias is a buzzword. A lot of people have been talking about it. So we talk about what is it? What is bias? When I also said that bias is universal, we all have it. And so we talk about it being an inclination or preference either for or against an individual or group that interferes with impartial judgment. And I think that last piece is the most important part, right? That interferes with impartial judgment. I could have come into tonight with all of these like preconceived ideas about the group of people that are on this, right? Okay, Decatur parents and all of the bias and all of the sort of fog that I may have already had about a group of parents that may be coming to this program tonight, and how that interferes with impartial judgment and how that could possibly interfere with even the way that I present tonight or answer a question, and even sort of thinking about that, even as parents, like how are we talking to our children? What is the language that we're using? What are the books that we're reading? And we'll get into that a little bit more. So again, just kind of thinking about biases and how that impacts the way that we do everything, honestly. Thinking about explicit versus implicit bias. What are the incidences that we're seeing in our classes, that we're seeing online? Is it explicit? Is it implicit? And so again, just the way that bias impacts, even impacts our teachers. And we know that children at the age of 3 pick up on our own biases. And so as I am walking down the street and I squeeze my son's hand just a little bit tighter and I pull him just a little bit closer, he picks up on that. And studies are showing that over the years, we really file all of those little things away, and we may not even be noticed that we're doing it. And so really, again, thinking about even the language, as I'm talking to my 3-year-old son, am I always saying fireman? Am I always, saying policeman rather than firefighter, and really like using inclusive language and understanding the biases that, again, I'm possibly passing on to him even through language. And so again, thinking about those things, and it's never too early and it's never too late to start learning, to start thinking of those things and start having those conversations with our students. If you're interested in doing a little bit more of a deeper dive, look at Walter Gilliam, Gilliam. Dr. Gilliam is doing some incredible research on bias in daycares. And so understanding that it is not just the school to prison pipeline, that it is in fact the cradle to prison pipeline, and that he is doing this research and looking at how big Black boys are being expelled in daycares. And they don't call it expelled at that age. They call it this isn't the right place for you, or they call it you're not quite ready for this daycare. And so really looking at the correlation as when these big Black boys are being expelled from daycares, how that impacts the rest of their lives. And so it's really, really interesting and fascinating. And that implicit bias that is happening with our youngest children. So the manifestations of bias, I want to go over this just real briefly because we're going to get into the pyramid of hate. So the manifestations of bias happens with stereotyping, then which leads to prejudice, which then leads to discrimination. So stereotyping is just the oversimplified generalization about a person or group, again, without regard to individual differences. If that goes unchecked, it turns into prejudice, which we all know is to prejudge. And then discrimination is that action where that denial of justice and fair treatment. So this is just, again, sort of a brief overview of the manifestations of bias. So the pyramid of hate and the pyramid of allyship. So this is for me, and I can send this out to everybody, or I can, you can Google it and find it. You can go to ADL's website and find information about this. But for me, this is one of the most powerful resources that we can use to even talk to our students about bullying and bias and things like that. So you'll see biased attitudes at the bottom of the pyramid of hate. And so you'll see that that's what we're talking about: stereotyping, fear of differences, justifying biases by seeking out like-minded people, lack of self-reflection or awareness of privilege. And so when all of that goes unchecked, or when all of that becomes normalized, we see things move up the pyramid of hate. And so that next level is acts of bias. So you'll see non-inclusive language, you'll see insensitive remarks, microaggressions, microaggressions being the everyday slights and indignities that marginalized people hear on a regular basis, and how, again, talking about intent versus impact, that when we hear microaggressions every single day over and over and over again, that the impact of that, I don't think we really know what that long-term impact would be about microaggressions. Name calling, bullying, slurs, dehumanization. This is kind of what we've been talking about, right? That acts of bias, that bullying, that non-inclusive language. As we're talking about non-inclusive language, even saying something like, rather than saying somebody is homeless, that person is experiencing homelessness, and how powerful that can be, so that we are not defining that person with that one part of their identity. So I'll say that again: rather than saying that someone is homeless, that person is experiencing homelessness. And how even just changing that to be more inclusive with the language that we're using, and how, again, we can use that with our children, and ensuring that they're again being advocates and allies. That next level is systemic discrimination, criminal justice disparities, voter suppression, unequal media representation, inequitable school resource distribution. That next level up is bias motivated violence, threats, desecration, vandalism, terrorism, murder, and on the very top of the pyramid of hate is genocide. And the definition is the act or intent to deliberately and systematically annihilate an entire people. And so when we talk about the pyramid of hate, I think, again, like as children, we were all sort of told this: sticks and stones may break our bones, but words will never hurt us. And we know that that's just not true. And so thinking about even at the bottom of the pyramid of hate, how somebody can say something and they'll say, "Oh, I'm just kidding." But really that impact is great. And holding each other accountable, holding adults accountable. What are the things that we're even posting online? What are the things that we're saying behind, the screen, or even in front of our children? And our children are picking up on that. And so understanding that those words do matter, and that we've got to do something about that, and that it's all our responsibilities for doing that. So we talk about understanding that not all biased attitudes are going to lead to genocide, but that every single genocide started with some sort of biased attitudes. and how powerful that is. And again, really understanding what stereotyping and fear of differences and non-inclusive language and things like that can have. So I don't want it to be all sort of doom and gloom. So the pyramid of hate, we like to also make into a pyramid of allyship. And I want to make sure if y'all do have questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. I want to make sure that we definitely have enough time to answer all of those. But we talk about taking the pyramid of hate and making it something positive. Like, what are the things that we can do to respond? What are the things that we can do to support our children when they do want to be allies for each other and respond to incidents of hate and bullying? And so you'll see at the bottom of this pyramid is challenging the stereotypes that we're hearing or that we're possibly even saying, doing our own research about marginalization and privilege. And again, like, if we're doing this as parents, then how can we pass that information along to our children? Ask a targeted person how you can support them. Again, like when we're talking about bullying and we're talking about incidents of bias, what are the ways that we can empower other students and other people to respond? And a lot of that, it is just asking the targeted person how we can support them and understanding that we are asking just that one person. We aren't asking that person to speak for the entire marginalized community. And I think that's really important. Again, educate yourself with more inclusive and accurate language. The next one up top, volunteer to be a poll watcher, advocate for voting rights, engage in criminal justice reform, even understanding all of the sort of legislation and things that are happening in your state. Supporting schools in your school district. I think just by being here tonight, y'all are supporting your school, your children, and your school district. That next level is attend solidarity vigils and rallies. And then on the very top, be aware of bias laws that impact refugees, and then mandatory education on genocides and Holocaust in schools. So what can schools do? So I think this is one of the most sort of important things that ADL has to offer schools. So on our website, you can report an incident. And so it comes directly to us. You can do it anonymously. But again, if you know that your child or somebody else is being bullied at school, or there has been some sort of incident of hate, you can go to our website and report an incident. And so once you do that, it really gives us, it really provides information about what is happening in our schools and our communities. And then we also can then go to the school and start conversations about what are the programs that you can do? How are you going to respond? What sort of conversations do you need to be having with not only your thank you, Marty. Not only with your school, but just maybe the school district. So we now have an entire best practices resource that we can provide to middle schools and high schools when something has happened. And so the first part, it's called PEACE Framework. So the first part is prevent and prepare. Encourage reporting, having conversations with our students about the difference between reporting and snitching. I am amazed that every time I go into an elementary school, even, they have learned snitches get stitches. And really just kind of understanding the difference between reporting, which is really trying to keep somebody safe and keep them out of danger, versus snitching, trying to get somebody in trouble. So even having that sort of conversation. Act quickly and respond. Again, this is for the schools, but I think this is really good information even for parents to have, where you can say, go to the ADL. They've got this amazing resource, and these are the things that we can talk about responding to if there's been an incident. Communicate, educate, and heal. And so again, really thinking about with that educate and heal, that so many of these incidents happening are teachable moments. And how can we take those and make them teachable moments rather than just focusing on what the discipline is, and understanding, even when we're talking about communicate, that I know how frustrating it is when a school can't tell us what's happening because of different laws. And so really understanding how important it is to communicate, for us understanding that they can't tell us everything that is happening, but what they can tell us is what are they going to do to educate and heal. and understanding that especially when an incident happens, it's not just about that one or two targets, that it impacts entire communities, especially when something has gone viral or is happening online. So even just kind of understanding that this is a great framework for schools. And if you're interested in this, or if something has happened and you want us to reach out to a school, please reach out to me and let me know what we can do. So here are some different things. So ouch strategies. I want to make sure again that we've got time for some different things. These are 6 different strategies that we talk about. Again, we can provide these to our children. We can use these as adults. But these are things that we put in our back pocket, right? So when somebody says something, assume good intent and explain the impact. There are a lot of well-intentioned people that are saying things that are offensive. And so can we assume good intent? But the most important part is to explain the impact. Ask a question. Where did you come up with that? Why do you believe that? Where did you get that information from? And again, it kind of puts it back on that person to even think about what they've said and to answer that question. Interrupt and redirect. As somebody sort of launches into something that you know is going to be non-inclusive, you can say, like, stop. We're just not going to go there. I'm not going to listen to this. And so even just interrupting and redirecting. Let's talk about the weather or whatever it may be. Broaden the universal human behavior. This is kind of in response to stereotypes. So I think that there are actually a lot of other people that also eat that food, dress that way, pray that way, love that way, whatever it may be. And so broadening the universal human behavior when people are stereotyping. And on the other side of that is make it individual. Are you talking about one Decatur high school student, or are you talking about all of them? And so that's that make it individual piece. And then say ouch. Oftentimes I know that it's cheesy, but I've had friends that have texted me and said, Erin, I ouched somebody today. And it really worked because it really kind of puts people on notice that what they've said is offensive. And so just saying ouch and really kind of then getting into even more dialogue. So these are just 6 individual strategies that we want folks to just kind of keep in their back pocket. That does not mean that it's easy. I can tell you I do this for a living every single day, and I can tell you stories of my own biases, my own implicit biases, and also times where I'm like, oh, I missed that opportunity to respond. And so sometimes just practicing, but also understanding that it's not easy all the time to respond. So 3 things to avoid when you know that something has happened. And so the first one is to ignore the incident. And just understanding that when your child or when a child, grandchild, whoever it is, comes to you, we cannot ignore the incident, because then we cannot expect them to come to us when it has happened again. Hopefully it's not going to happen again, but just understanding that, like, if we ignore it, they may not come back to us. Don't excuse it. Boys will not be boys. We have got to get out of that mindset. And so don't excuse the behavior. And so again, that is invalidating what is happening. It's invalidating how that feels to our child, or again, to a child in general. And so don't ignore the incident. Don't excuse it. And then allow yourself to become immobilized by fear or uncertainty. And so it's okay to say, let's talk about this. Can I have a few minutes to kind of take a breath or whatever it may be? And so again, just it's heartbreaking when our children come to us and say something has happened, but we can't sort of let that fear and uncertainty just stop us from responding. And so really kind of thinking about it and kind of thinking about how you may respond, if and when our children are coming to us. So this is really, I know I keep saying it and we're running out of time. So I want to go over this really quickly because I think this is so powerful. So we have a program that's called Empowering Young People in the Aftermath of Hate. Incidents of hate are happening all the time. And so how do we think about it? How do we talk about it? And so I will actually send all of this out. We have a resource guide for how we have these conversations, especially with the shootings and the murders that we are seeing even just this week with police and unarmed people of color in our communities. And so this is just kind of a couple of things to think about when we are having this conversation with our children. And it's called Empowering Young People in the Aftermath of Hate. It is literally a step-by-step resource for parents on how to have some of these really difficult conversations about these incidents of hate that continue to happen in our communities. So these are some of those ADL resources. I know that Marty and Terry have been putting them in the chat. I think some of the ones that I really want to touch on are Books Matter. On our Books Matter website, there are over 700 books that you can go. You can basically populate something and say, I want a book on ableism for elementary school students, and it will populate books for you. Every month we have a different book of the month that comes with a lesson plan. So those are incredible. Table talk, family conversations about current events. Again, go online, go to adl.org and the education. And there are all sorts of different sort of ways that how do we talk about the murder of George Floyd? How do we talk about now that the trial is over? How do we have those conversations? We literally just released something yesterday on how do we have these conversations with the guilty verdict. How do we have conversations about voting suppression, right? So there's all sorts of different table talks on our website. Bullying and cyberbullying, prevention strategies and resources. Again, like understanding all of the different apps that our children are using. How do we, prevent things from happening if we can? How do we have these conversations with the school when it does happen? What are the expectations of schools when it happens? And then the lesson plans are more for teachers and for schools. And so it's literally a step-by-step lesson plan on, again, how do we have these conversations from a respectful way in our classrooms? Because we know that what is happening in our homes, what is happening in our communities are coming into our classrooms. And we've got to figure out how we can have respectful conversations about what's happening. And civil conversations. And so there are a ton of different resources on ADL's website that you can check out. So I am going to stop sharing. I've got 2 minutes. I don't think I left much time, Dr. Jones, for Q&A.
We have one quick, first of all, I want to absolutely, I would be remiss if I did not say thank you so much. This was a wealth of information and very timely, very pertinent, and useful in what we're experiencing day to day in our communities. So I thank you so much for this. And something about this has me feeling like there may be a part 2. So we will likely be checking in with you and your calendar. We do have one question that came in, and it is, how do you address things that come up in front of or with close family, but will be controversial and cause issues?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think we all have been there, right? I mean, it's whether even during, COVID, when we're not seeing people, I feel like these things are happening, right? On Zoom calls or whatever. I think we have to still have the conversation. I think even with, can we set some ground rules? Even with, every time we do a program, we set ground rules and we say, this is what we're going to do. This is what we're not going to do. And so sometimes, do we even need to set ground rules with our family, knowing that this is going to be a hard conversation and we need to do it and we need to have it in a respectful way. Even if it's going to be controversial. I feel like if we can get to that place of respect and understanding and listening, not just hearing, doing that, really listening to each other rather than thinking about what's the next thing that I'm going to say. And I think that even if we don't agree, we can get to that place of having these hard conversations. I don't agree with all of my friends by any means, and I don't agree with all of my family, but we've also gotten to that place where we can have those conversations. And to be totally honest, sometimes we have to say now is not the right time. And I have certainly said that myself, to say, I don't have the brain power to do that right now. I want to have this conversation with you, but I just can't have it right now. Can we set aside some time so that I can be more present and understanding that this is going to cause some issues, but I do want to have it. But I think we've got to start having those conversations, because we're all just speaking past each other or not having them. Or, I have a colleague that says one of her presentation titles is "You Can't Unfriend Everybody." And so, just again, sort of understanding that they are going to be hard, but I do believe that we have to have those conversations.
Absolutely. We have another question, and I can kind of answer this one a little bit. The question is, what type of bullying education are we doing here in CSD with our kids? And are we using the ADL framework? So we are doing a couple programs. One is SEEKS through curriculum and instruction, and one is C Learning. Some of you became familiar with that during Wellness Wednesdays and some of the initiatives that we had. The district counseling program is working to continue that social emotional learning curriculum K-12, so that we can attend to the culture and climate of the school and specifically discuss bullying and cyberbullying and how to create a kind and compassionate culture in the school building, and then have that extend into the community as well. Some of our things are informed by the ADL framework. Like I said, we do have some schools that are no place for hate sites. And of course, we would love to extend that to additional sites. But we had a plan to do see the social emotional learning specific curriculum that we had for the year, and then COVID hit. So we had to kind of change things, but it is definitely in the works to continue and to do bigger and better in the coming year. I see another one. Can we try to make these books available? Can we try and make sure these books are available for our kids, and how can DPI help? So, Terry, was that a question to you from someone about the book list that Erin shared with us?
For a question from myself, it's just of all of us looking in the community, let's start looking at those book lists and talking with our PTSAs and seeing, are they in the libraries? Are they in the book room at the Housing Authority Community Center? How can we make sure these books are available for our kids that are on the reading list? Because I've looked at a few of them, and my goodness, they've got some books on there. So
something that we can do, and how I always tell you, send me an email because I'll forget, to connect with curriculum and instruction and our media specialists to see what we can get in our learning areas. Media centers, what we used to call in the old days, media centers, libraries. At the high school now, it's called the Learning Commons. But to see what type of resources, and including those books specifically, that we can get on hand in the schools. There is a question. I don't see a lot of discussions in CSD centered around intersectionality. When can we expect to be a part of that conversation? That's actually a very good point. I'm glad you brought it up. Our Black Student Union and our Asian Cultural Student Group actually recently had a joint meeting on the intersectionality of their experiences right after the incident here in Atlanta. And so something that I'm really loving that our students are doing it's starting with some of this stuff is starting with them, and they came to the sponsors of their groups and wanted to do something. We got together, and there were some really good conversations, questions, and suggestions made from those two groups discussing the intersectionality of their race, bias, prejudice related experiences. And it would be great if we could do a bit more of that with students and with adults as well. Again, I am, as the lead counselor, I'm a part of the Equity and Student Support Leadership Team. My email, kjones@csdecatur.net. Shoot me an email so that I can connect with some folks to see if we can do something related to intersectionality for adults as well, because our kids are already working in that area.
Dr. Jones, that's absolutely something. Susan, it's an awesome point. So that is absolutely something that we would, could help with y'all with any sort of conversation.
Great.
Tim, I think we have one more question, time for one more question before we call it a night.
Okay. The last one, does CSD have a zero tolerance towards bullying online and otherwise? What are the repercussions? I cannot quote for you exactly what it is, but it is in the code of conduct for incidences of bullying in person, online, the different levels and the consequences related to each of those. The code of conduct is on the page of forms and documents. When you go to the first page of whatever school your child is in, there's a link to forms and documents. It will be in there. So you can absolutely look in there. I do not want to sit here and try to quote something for you because I will get it wrong. It's covered in there. All right. Back to you, Terry or Marnie.
Well, I just want to thank both of these wonderful women for being here tonight and for addressing something that I know has been on a lot of our hearts for quite a while. Thank you so much.